Meanwhile, there's a new study, and parents should really listen to this because it finds that e-readers, these devices that you see here, can really help their kids who are struggling with dyslexia. Researchers found that devices like iPads and Kindles were easier for dyslexic patients to read than traditional books. Dyslexia, of course, is most common among children. Statistics show 10 to 15% of Americans do suffer from it. Only 5 in every 100 such individuals have the disorder diagnosed and treated. So in many people, it goes unrecognized until adulthood, and there is no known cure. So what does all of this mean? Dr. Robert Melillo is a specialist in functional neurology and the founder and executive director of Brain Balance Achievement Centers. Doctor, great to have you here.
Great to be here.
So why is it easier to read on your iPad or your iPhone than in a regular book?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, but what's interesting is that most people don't realize is that when you're reading something, you think that you're seeing every single word. But in fact, you're actually skipping over words. You're actually only reading about 7 or 9 words at a time. And really, 30% of words you never actually see, and you actually fill that in. So there's an issue that if maybe the lines are smaller, then you won't miss as much, or you don't have to fill in as much. And also, when you're jumping from line to line, there is the eye movements, and many people with reading problems have problems with their eye movements and tracking, and that makes it more difficult, so that it may limit that.
I was reading that they sort of describe dyslexia as a visual ADD, almost like there's too much stimuli on the page for some kids. So if you boil it down to just 3 words, they're not as distracted by the other print that's happening on the page. That's a left hemisphere, right hemisphere brain thing?
Yeah, that's one of the things that they're thinking about. But ADHD and dyslexia are clearly 2 completely different things from a neurological perspective, and it's important to realize that they are neurological problems. And what we're looking at is dyslexia, true dyslexia, is really a left hemisphere deficit, whereas ADHD is really a right hemisphere deficit. But in both, we can't get both the hemispheres to work together, and that's really the primary problem.
Fascinatingly, the lead scientist of this research out of Harvard himself is dyslexic. And he says that he struggled to read. In fact, he stopped reading for pleasure, he says, for 20 years. And then he just stumbled upon this discovery when he was reading on his iPhone. He said, why is this easier for me than reading a book? So how revolutionary do you think this will be for children?
Well, I think it's great. And again, it's not just children, but it's adults. And we're talking about maybe 20% of the population, maybe 50 million people that have these issues that we know of. So this is a big deal. And anything that helps them read is great. But the important thing is to remember that this is just a crutch. And what we're finding at our centers, and what we're using is something known as functional neurology. We can actually correct dyslexia on a long-term basis
and even
improve it. Well, it's more than just reading. That's the issue. Because it's a neurological problem in its left hemisphere, you have to do things directed towards the left hemisphere. And a combination, it's called multimodal. So things like auditory stimulation, visual stimulation, different music, exercises, balance exercises, even in diet and nutrition is important. Just doing reading exercises alone doesn't work, and that's what we know, and that's why we typically think it's a lifelong problem, but it doesn't have to be.
It's so fascinating. I mean, there's all this therapy, as you've described, but you could also just read on your iPad and it would be easier, but obviously it wouldn't fix the whole problem. But Dr. Melillo, thanks so much for explaining it to us. Great to see you. All right, meanwhile, keeping an eye